Hi, Michael. Hi, Ernesto. Today's question says like this. Some Advaita Vedanta teachers tell the people who come to see them that the sadhana is not necessary, so they don't reinforce the idea that they're on a spiritual journey. And that is why Nisargadatta, for example, did not make any concessions to the questions asked on the relative aspects of the teachings. Is it important to facilitate the development of spiritual maturity of a student by adapting the teachings down to the level of consciousness of the person who asks? Or on the contrary, is it better to adopt a more radical approach without making concessions to the relative aspects of the teachings?
Okay, there are a lot of questions here. The first thing is, sadhana is absolutely necessary. Sadhana means a means. So long as we are in bondage, we need a means to get out of bondage. So, and that means requires effort and perseverance on our part. So anyone who says that sadhana is not necessary, they don't know what they're talking about, basically, or they're misleading people if they do know what they're talking about. Bhagavan has made it absolutely clear. Sadhana is necessary. Sadhana doesn't mean we have to do anything, but even to stop doing anything, even to surrender completely, requires effort and perseverance. So, because the nature of ego, as Bhagavan says in verse 25 of Ulladu, ego is a formless phantom that comes into existence grasping form, stands grasping form. Grasping and feeding on form, it flourishes. Leaving one form, it grasps another form. So grasping is the very nature of ego. And the natural inclination of ego is to grasp things other than itself. Because so long as it's grasping things other than itself, it has a semi-existence. When it ceases to grasp other things, it loses its semi-existence. Every night when we fall asleep, we are too tired to continue grasping, so we stop grasping and we fall asleep. That is a state of manolaya. In order to bring about the destruction of ego or mind, we need to not just give up grasping other things, we need to grasp ourselves. That is, we need to turn our attention back towards ourselves, because ego is a false awareness of ourself. It's an awareness of ourself as something other than what we actually are. So, the only way to destroy this false awareness of ourself is to be aware of ourselves as we actually are. And for that, we need to turn our attention within to attend to ourselves. What we actually are is pure awareness. The nature of pure awareness is to be aware of nothing other than itself. The nature of ego is to be always aware of other things. So as long as we are aware of things other than ourselves, we are not aware of ourselves as we actually are. So to be aware of ourselves as we actually are, we need to attend to ourself alone, so that thereby withdrawing our attention from all other things. So that practice is absolutely necessary. So long as we've got Vishaya Vasana, so long as we've got that inclination to cling to other things, we need to make effort to cling to ourselves. Bhagavan has made that very clear. So the first point is, sadhana is absolutely necessary. The second thing is, you say the reason some people say that sadhana is not necessary is so they don't reinforce the idea that we're on a spiritual journey. What is wrong with reinforcing the idea that we're on a spiritual journey? From the perspective of ego, we're certainly on a spiritual journey. But the journey we are on is not a journey of going outwards. It's a journey of withdrawing back within. It's not a journey of acquisition. It's a journey of renunciation. So we're withdrawing ourselves from all other things. It is a journey from the perspective of ego, because we can't, having cultivated so many Vishaya Vasanas, Vishaya Vasanas means our inclination to be aware of, to experience things other than ourselves. Having accumulated and strengthened Vishaya Vasanas, over so many countless lives, we are not able just to give up all at once. We need to gradually wean our mind off its tasting going outwards. And we can do that by the practice of self-investigation and self-surrender. That is by the practice of trying to turn our attention back within and thereby letting go of other things. So this is the journey we're on. It is definitely, from a relative perspective, it's definitely a journey. You also say, talk about not making concessions to questions asked on the relative aspects of the teachings. I don't understand what this means, because I understand the word, but what I mean is I don't understand this idea, because all spiritual teachings are given from a relative aspect. For whom a spiritual teaching is given is for ourselves as ego. And so long as we take ourselves to be ego, we live in a world of relativity. So because we experience this relativity, that is, because we experience all this multiplicity, we need to, all this is an illusion and none of it is real. But so long as we experience it, we need to escape from it. So we need to understand how this relative existence came into being. Bhagavan says very simply, if ego comes into existence, everything comes into existence. If ego doesn't exist, everything doesn't exist. Ego itself is everything. That means that ego is the root of all this relativity, all this multiplicity. So teachings have to be given from the perspective of ego. That is why Bhagavan begins Zuludu Napadu with the words, Namolahum Kandalal, because we see the world. If we didn't see any world, there would be no problem and no need for any spiritual teaching. But the fact is, now why do we see the world? Because we've risen as ego. As ego, we always grasp the form of the body as I. When Bhagavan said we grasp the form of the body, he doesn't mean the form of the body exists there and then we grasp it, because the body, nothing exists independent of ego. As he says, only when ego comes into existence, everything else comes into existence. So ego is the root. So when we rise as ego, we project a body and take it as I. That projection and experiencing as I is what he means by grasping the form of a body as I. And consequently, having grasped one form, we see multiple other forms. And so we're constantly grasping those things by means of our power of attention. So this is the nature of ego. So we can't escape from this relativity merely by denying its existence or pretending it's not there. It is there, but what we need to understand is how all this came into existence. Bhagavan says it all came into existence because you rose as ego. If you want to be free of it, don't rise as ego. How do we rise as ego? By grasping other things. So how do we cease rising as ego? By grasping ourselves. So it's very simple. There's no need to pretend that this isn't there. It's not real. Bhagavan makes it very clear. None of this is real, but he accepts it seems to exist. That's why he says, because we see the world. Who is the we? The very first word Uludunaptu is we, Nam, because we see the world. In Tamil, the word order is different. We, the world, because see is how it's ordered in Tamil. So we is the very first word in Uludunaptu. In some context, when Bhagavan uses we, he's referring to our real nature. But in that context, he's referring to ego. Because who is it who sees the world? Only ego. It's only when we rise as ego that we see the world. So the root problem is this we as ego. So this is what we need to tackle. What is this ego? Bhagavan explains very clearly in Uludunaptu. Ego is nothing but a false awareness of ourselves. In order to eradicate this ego, we need to be aware of ourselves as we actually are. Why? Being aware of ourselves as we actually are is the easiest of all things, according to Bhagavan. But it seems to us to be difficult. Why does it seem to be difficult? Because we're not yet willing to let go of other things. So long as we have this attachment and desire for other things, we are unwilling to turn within. Turning within is easy if we are willing to do so, but we're not willing to do so because we are not yet willing to surrender this ego. Because as he says in verse 26 of Ulanabdu, which I mentioned earlier, but I'll mention again, he said, if ego comes into existence, everything comes into existence. If ego doesn't exist, everything doesn't exist. Everything here means all phenomena. Ego itself is everything. That is, all this multiplicity is just an expansion of ego. Ego is the seed, and it's expanded as all these things. Then he says in the last sentence of that verse, 26, therefore, investigating what this means ego, what this is giving up everything. Why is that? Because if we investigate this ego, it will subside and disappear. Why? Because the nature of ego is looking at other things. So long as we look at other things, we seem to be ego. If we turn our attention back to look at ourselves, there's no such thing as ego to be found. So ego is not real, but it seems real so long as we're aware of anything other than ourselves. So we need to turn our attention back to ourselves. When we turn our attention back to ourselves, this ego dissolves and disappears. And when ego disappears, everything else disappears along with it. That's why he says, investigating what this ego is giving up everything. So we must be willing to give up everything in order to investigate ourselves keenly enough to know what we actually are. So firstly, we have to accept the problem. The problem is a relative problem. It's only relative to our rising as ego that all these problems exist. But absolute truth is there are no problems, no world, no ego, nothing. But from our present perspective, we seem to have risen as ego, and consequently, all these things seem to have come into existence. So we have to be realistic about this. Now, this is the problem. Bhagavan has explained to us what is the root of the problem. That is what we need to deal with now. The later part of the question, is it important to facilitate the development of spiritual maturity of a student by adapting the teachings down to the level of consciousness of the person who asks? Yes, of course. Bhagavan said the teaching has to be according to the taught. Bhagavan generally gave us the deepest teachings. But if people weren't ready to accept the deeper teachings, he would adapt it. He would dilute it and modify it just to suit their need in order to help them to go deeper. Because if you give the very deepest teachings to everyone, if people aren't ready to accept that, they're just going to run away. They're not going to stay and try. So the teachings have to be adapted. That's why so many different spiritual paths and religions, all these things have come into existence, adapted to the needs of individuals. But if we want the ultimate truth, we need to accept the radical teachings that Bhagavan has given us. So even Bhagavan adapted his teachings according to the level of people. That is, he always tried to push people to the deeper level. But if they weren't ready to accept the deeper level, then he would make concessions. But he would say what was appropriate to them at their level. But even to the simplest of people, but for example, there was a lady called Desoama. Her name was Akalandamaya. She was a poor village woman from a village about 50 miles away from Tiruvannamalai called Deso. Whenever she could save up enough money, she would come to Tiruvannamalai and stay some days, feed Bhagavan, and then go back. And when she used to come, she used to be accompanied generally by Mustan, who was also from the same village, who was he was a simple weaver from a very, very poor weaver from a Muslim caste. But he was very, very devoted to Bhagavan. So he used to accompany her. They would come and she would feed Bhagavan. But she was a simple, uneducated village woman. She often used to hear Bhagavan answering people's questions. But she didn't know anything about this spirituality or anything, I mean, all this spiritual philosophy or all these things. So she didn't really have any questions to ask. But one day she asked Bhagavan, Bhagavan, I'm not able to understand all that you tell to people, but please tell me something. Please give me some upadesha, some teaching. And Bhagavan simply said to her, Une vidamaliru. That means be without leaving yourself. So Bhagavan gives the very highest teachings, even to the simplest of people. But sometimes the very simple people can grasp it better than the very learned people. Because the very learned people have so many, no, but isn't it said like this? Isn't it said like that? But in such and such a scripture, it's said like this, and it's explained in this way, and it's explained in that way. Their mind is full of so many ideas. So often the simple, uneducated people are able to grasp a point, because what is it we have to grasp? We just have to grasp ourselves. As Bhagavan said, be without leaving yourself. That is the essence of all his teaching. So, but for those whose minds are full of so many, who've read so many books and have got so many other ideas, Bhagavan then Bhagavan has to give more explanations in order to wean their mind away from all those complicated explanations and make them willing to accept the simpler explanations. So the teachings have to be according to the Torah. Yes, that is true. But then the next,
Michael, it's incredible. For example, I remember when some people arrived to Nisargadatta, no?
Yes.
And suddenly Nisargadatta said, don't make me practice questions, no? In different cases that people try to receive an adaptation of the teachings to a slow level. I think along the years that a real jnani adapt to the conscious level of each people perfectly, because know exactly what is the point of each student or each aspirant in his way.
But it's not over the years. That is, as I say, Bhagavan generally, he would start by giving the deepest teachings. The deepest teachings are the highest teachings. He would start with that, because that is what is most beneficial. So Bhagavan gave everyone a chance, and only when they were not ready to accept that would he begin to come down to their level. Because you have to give people, first you have to give them a chance. You have to first give them the deepest teaching. If they're obviously not grasping that, then you can modify it and make it more palatable for them. So Bhagavan always had this, the natural tendency of Bhagavan was always to give the deepest teachings. That is, whatever question people ask, Bhagavan will first say, to who's asking this question? To whom is this problem? That is, Bhagavan is constantly trying to turn our attention back towards ourselves, because that is the only way to escape from all these problems. So sometimes when people criticize Bhagavan and said, oh, he's always giving even the highest teachings, even to simple villagers, Bhagavan said, what do you want me to do? Do you want me first to teach puja and japa and dhyana and all these things? And then after they've done puja for 10, 20 years, they'll come back to me and say, I've been doing this, I've not got any benefit. Then I'll have to tell them, no, there's a higher thing than this, you do japa. Then why not give the real thing first? If they're not ready to accept it, then you can come down. But give them a chance, because otherwise, if you give them more diluted teachings first, later they're going to be dissatisfied with those, because there's no means to eradicate ego other than self-investigation. That Bhagavan himself said, there was actually an incident, it's recorded in some book, but once when some villagers came and asked Bhagavan some questions, and he as it was his way, he told them to investigate themselves. after Bhagavan went out for a walk on the hill, Kabirganta, who was present at the time, turned around to the people there and said, see, Bhagavan teaches this very highest teaching, even to these illiterate villagers. How can that be appropriate? Even for a learned person like me, it's very difficult to put this into practice, but he teaches it even to these illiterate people. If he had, it would be more appropriate if he were to send them to me and I could give them a mantra, which they can do japa of. That would be more suitable for them. Afterwards, this was reported to Bhagavan, that Kabirganta had commented like that. And Bhagavan said, what to do? This is all I know. This is all I did, and this is all I know. And then Bhagavan added more. He said, if I give them a mantra or puja or some other thing, sooner or later they're going to be dissatisfied with that, and they're going to come back to me and say, I've been doing this, but it's not, still not eradicated ego. So I'll have to give them something deeper. Why not give the deepest teachings first? Why to take any roundabout way? But the way to eradicate ego is only by self-investigation and self-surrender. So why to teach other things first? For those who are not ready to accept this, then other things may be necessary. It may be necessary to teach from puja, japa, dhyana, whatever is there according to their taste. But first give people a chance. First tell them the plain, simple truth. And then if they want something more complicated, okay, you can, okay, if you want to do your puja, you do your puja or your japa or your...
Maybe when some people are very obcecate, no, with I want to do something different at Atma-vichara, something different.
Yeah.
He gave him, okay, no?
Yeah, Bhagavan generally, he didn't teach other paths. If someone said, Bhagavan, I'm doing this this japa or this dhyana or something, is it good? Bhagavan said, oh, yes, it's good. Because they don't ask for anything more. Bhagavan will not open his mouth unless he's asked. So if you ask, Bhagavan, I'm doing this, is it good? Yes, it's good. Why not? But if you ask, Bhagavan, I'm doing this, but I'm still not getting what I'm looking for, then Bhagavan will ask, who is looking for something? Find out who that is, then your problems will be solved. So Bhagavan will always, his inclination will always be to push people to deeper teachings.
And what is incredible is the facility to give the most heightened teachings.
Yes.
In the very simple and little words.
Yes.
To the analphabetic and uneducated people. No?
Yes.
And
yes.
Exactly.
But actually, that is. There's no wonder in that, because the deepest teachings are also the simplest teachings, because the ultimate truth is ekameva advaityam, one only without a second. So what can be simpler than one? One without a second is the simplest you can be. So the simpler the teachings, the closer they are to the truth. So the simple truth is, all troubles arise because we arise as ego. We arise as ego by looking at other things. Look back at ourselves, ego will subside and everything will vanish. And what will remain is what alone is real. That is the pure awareness I am.
That's the good thing. That's the good thing about the books that we have that have been reviewed by Bhagavan or written even by him, that they're on the same level of the teaching. So it's not like other books, like where some person asks one thing, some person asks on a different level, and they are put in the same book, and now there's contradictions because the same book you can find
most of the books that record what questions and answers, because people ask questions from so many different levels. As you say, they're full of it's a bit confusing. If we read talks, what exactly is, why is Bhagavan saying like this here and something else there? If we understand the core of his teachings, then it will all fit into place. We'll understand it. But the core of his teachings, he's expressed very simply in works like Who Am I, Uladunapadu, and such things. If we understand the basic principles he teaches us there, then everything else will be clear.
Yes.
There was one more bit of this question. The final part of the question was, or on the contrary, is it better to adopt a more radical approach without making concessions to the relative aspects of the teachings? Bhagavan's approach is the most radical approach. And it's not a matter of making concessions to the relative aspect. It acknowledges the existence of this relativity. Because if there was no relativity, there would be no need for any teachings. It's because we have risen as ego, but all this relativity has come into existence. So Bhagavan acknowledges, according to Bhagavan, there is no world, there is no ego. That's the ultimate truth. But he begins by acknowledging our point of view because we see the world. So he makes a concession, because if he doesn't do so, if he just teaches a jata, there's nothing has ever come into existence, nothing was ever going to cease, there's no sadhaka, no sadhana, no moksha, nothing. If he teaches that, that's of no use to anyone. He gives it. Yeah, I mean, that is the ultimate truth. But yeah, in order to, we can't know the ultimate truth by just hearing those words. We need to, well, what is the root of all? Now our experience is quite contrary to a jata. We experience all this. It's all come into existence somehow or other. A jata says nothing has ever come into existence. Nothing has ever appeared. But in our view, all this has come into existence. Why has it come into existence? Bhagavan gives the simplest explanation. Because you have risen as ego. Don't rise as ego and it won't come into existence. When you don't rise as ego in sleep, nothing is there. When you rise as ego, all this multiplicity comes into existence. But in the absence of ego and all this multiplicity, you're perfectly happy and contented in sleep. You never make any complaints in sleep. Oh, this sleep is boring, I want to get out of it. No, you're very happy so long as you're sleeping. Troubles arise only with the ego. So Bhagavan has given the simplest explanation.
What people have too much difficulties is when to understand that the ego is a magician, and all that the ego is seeing converts in real for his perspective. No?
Yes, yes. And because why is that? Because whenever we rise as ego, we experience ourselves as a body. But what is actually real is only ourself. But when we experience a body as ourself, that body seems to us to be real. And since that body is a part of this world, the whole world seems to be real. So when we're dreaming, so long as we are dreaming, the current dream seems to be real. The body seems to be I, and the world seems to be real. Only when we leave that dream and come to some other dream, then our identification with the body of a previous dream is severed. As soon as we no longer experience that dream body as I, then we recognize, oh, it was just a dream. It was all my own mental projection. But so long as we experience ourselves as that dream body, it all seemed to be real.
You're saying, Michael, that this is I consciousness that is that what gives the reality to.
Yes,
to
yes.
I mean, it's because we are real as consciousness that we take that reality from the ego's perspective, right?
Yes, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So there is no more radical approach than Bhagavan's approach. Bhagavan kept on pointing out, what does radical mean? Radical means going to the very root. What is the root of all this? It is only our rising as ego. So Bhagavan is always radical. He's always turning us back towards the root. Because the nature of this ego, the root of everything, is the ego. We seem to be ego only when we're looking at other things. So Bhagavan is constantly trying to turn our attention back to ourselves, back towards this ego. When we attend to ego, it, as he says in verse 25, if sought, it takes flight. So Bhagavan has given the most radical teachings in the most simple way, because the truth is very, very simple. Why it's difficult for people to accept this? Because we've got so many complicated ideas and beliefs, and we believe in Kundalini Shakti and this Shakti and that Shakti and this world and that world. So many things, so many ideas and beliefs we've got of various kinds. Or we believe in this religion or that religion. Only Jesus Christ is the savior. If you believe that, then okay, believe Jesus Christ, fine. But we need to be ready to give up all our old beliefs, our beliefs, whether they're worldly beliefs or religious beliefs or philosophical beliefs, and come back to a simple, what is our actual experience? Our actual experience is only when we rise as ego, all these things seem to exist. And so long as we experience all these things, they seem to be real. Just like the dream seems to be real, so long as we take ourselves to be part of that dream, and so long as we experience ourselves as a body in that dream. So it's very, very simple. But we need to be, in order to accept this, we need to be ready to give up all our old ideas.
That's certainly one of the dangers of the path, in the sense that we can in our minds modify the teachings or misinterpret the teachings or add new interpretation, my own interpretations to the teaching, which is communicated in a
this is what happens way. This is what happens all the time, because generally, unless we are ready to, unless we are at least have some willingness to let go of everything, we will try to complicate it, because the simple truth is very dangerous for ego. Ego thrives on complexity, on multiplicity, on mystery and everything. So so long as we have a taste in the mysteries of science or the mysteries of religion or any other mysteries, or anything complicated, we will, when we are told the simple truth, we'll read some complicated interpretation into it. But only if we have true vairagya, true detachment, will we be willing to accept the simple truth as Bhagavan told it, and will we not try to complicate it, because the more we complicate it, the more we are obscuring it.
Yes.
Why Bhagavan said it very, very simply, because simple is clear, complicated is obscure.
If the people really realize that the metaphor of Bhagavan, no, in the heights of the mountain, will say, you can open 10 holes and try to look water, no, but only in one hole you can give very profound, no.
Yes.
And it's not only for this, it's more than the complicated mind of words, of perspectives, of different teachings, how mix and obscure you, no?
Yes.
To the truth. For this reason, is very, very, very important recommendation to stay only in one path.
Yeah. And keep it simple, because there's no need to complicate, because the nature of the truth is very simple. So why should we unnecessarily complicate it? If we have a taste for complicating it, that shows we don't have a taste for letting go of all this complication.
They enjoy complicate take.
And as I said at the beginning, we are on a journey, but it's not a journey of acquisition of wealth or knowledge or anything. We're not acquiring anything. It is a journey of renunciation. We are giving up everything, because, as Bhagavan said, there is nothing new for us to know. The truth is, I am. We all know I am. The problem is, we now mistake this I am to be something other than what it actually is. So we need to let go of all the false knowledge, and what remains is the real knowledge, which is just I am.
And Michael, if you are 70 years old now, no, for example, and you
Yes.
know your first meet with Bhagavan teachings, no?
Yes.
You correct me if I'm not okay.
Yeah.
You take the Uladu Narpadu, Anuandam, Nanjar,
Yeah.
Guru Vachaka Kobai, and no more words.
Mm.
Try to understand very, very profound that.
Yeah.
And Nidhyasana, the practice in self-enquiry, and no more reading, no?
No. I mean, I do sometimes read other things. People often bring my attention to, in such and such a book, it said, in the Upanishads, it said like that, or in Shankara's commentary, it said like this, or in Gaudapada's Karika, it said like this. So I do sometimes read these things, a little at least, just to see what it's about. But I don't. It's not. I'm not confused by whatever. If I have, generally, I'm not much interested in reading anything else, because I believe everything that we need to know has already been explained by Bhagavan in a very simple way. But if I read other things, because I view it through the lens of Bhagavan's teachings, I don't get confused by it. I say, okay, they explain there in such and such a way for such and such a purpose. That is, even in Advaita, there are so many different levels of explanation.
Yeah.
If you study all the Advaitic texts, it's a huge ocean, so many the Upanishads, Brahma Sutras, Bhagavad Gita, and commentaries on them, and commentaries on the commentaries, and other texts, and there's a vast body of literature. And the more people explain it, the more complicated it becomes. So you can go on studying these things forever, but you won't get clarity. But if we stick to Bhagavan's teachings, we get all the clarity we need. And then when we read other things, we'll see them in a correct perspective.
One job that maybe will be a very, very great opportunity for the people who is studying the Bhagavan's teachings, maybe is detect all the faults, no, the wrongs in the rest of the teachings around Bhagavan, about Bhagavan. For example, no, what you wrote in the last article in the blog, no, about the Varaya Mutaliar, no,
Yes.
with this. Sure, you found along your life too many places in the right, no,
Yes.
and make an article, no, to or different chapters, no, the wrongs.
That there is no limit to the amount of wrong interpretations. Even if we explain why the existing wrong interpretations are wrong, people will still find more ways to interpret them wrongly. That is what we need to focus on generally. I mean, obviously, sometimes where there's a like this thing about free will, there's so much confusion about this. This is something that comes up again and again, and it's actually it's one of the most it lends itself to creating confusion, because it is very subtle and relatively complicated compared to the rest of Bhagavan's teachings. So people like to latch onto that and to make confusion out of it. But there is no end to the way in which people are going to misinterpret Bhagavan's teachings. So as a general rule, I just like to focus on his main works and continue repeating again and again the same principles. Whatever questions I'm asked, the same principles we can apply to answering them. And if we stick to the core of Bhagavan's teachings, then those who are willing to understand will understand. Those who are not willing to understand, they will definitely misinterpret in their own way. It's inevitable. It will always happen. The nature of the human mind is such that it will always complicate and confuse. So only for those who are willing to let go of all the confusion, all the other ways of understanding things, those people will understand. So there will be no end to trying to correct wrong interpretations.
Yes, definitely.
Even Bhagavan kept quiet. When people misinterpreted his teachings, he kept quiet because he knew that's all they're ready to grasp now.